Hi guys, this is Will here from Shanaku Pipe Works, known variously as Shanaku and Dulakaba and whatever, but we're here today to see how a basic Shanaku Medwakh is made. When we say that these are handmade Medwakh, we mean they are handmade Medwakh, and today you're going to see how that happens. Now what I've done is I've marked the centers on both ends of this wonderful piece of triple grade A cherry, and we're getting set up so that we can get started on it. I'm using a pronged center held inside my 4-jaw chuck on the one end, and I'm just using a live center at the other end. The colors are a little bit funny because it's the only camera I have that has like a flippable screen, so I could tell whether or not I had this stuff in shot. So I'm starting off with a parting tool, and what I'm doing is I'm just taking the profile of the blank down to round to about 5/8 inch, right in that general area. Smoke my Medwakh while I'm narrating this. Now, once I've got this spun down so that I've got a nice round surface, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be marking the platform for the pipe's bowl. I want to leave the full amount to the block here so that we have all that wood as structural resistance to the stresses and strains of being drilled at a large diameter, because it's a 1/2 inch hole that we're eventually going to have to drill there, and we want to make sure that we don't have anything split or break. I'm now taking my parting tool again, and once again I am cutting in until I get down to round, maybe a little below, right around 5/8 of an inch. Want nice clean edges on this block, and we're just going to continue to take her down until we get right in the general neighborhood of where we actually want the ras, the beak of the finished pipe to be in terms of its overall size. Now what I'm doing is I'm spinning it around, and I'm going to remove the pronged center from my 4-jaw chuck, and I'm going to take the rounded section that I just created at the beak end of the pipe, and I'm going to put it in that 4-jaw chuck so that now I'm guaranteed to have a nice good grip, a nice round end, and since both ends are marked center, it means I'll be able to use my tailstock to come up into the mark I have already established, and that means everything is once again in alignment, and this is going to ensure that we can take and now profile this pipe. One of the things that has to happen here as we make this pipe is we have to find this wonderful balancing act between a smallness of the pipe in order to ensure that it's easy to carry around and use and such. I'm going to be using a skew to start this, and you'll notice I'm using the long point of the skew facing downwards, which is upside down to how a lot of people use the skew. I don't know if this is right or wrong, but it's how my grandpa taught me to use a skew, and it's an incredibly safe way to be able to do these shearing cuts, to begin to take off stock and smooth it down without having to worry that that skew is going to jump, because that skew is sharp as a razor, and I mean sharp as a razor. I'm now going back to my parting tool, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a basic profile for me to follow so that I can bring this down to a nice even cylinder. Currently, while I narrate this, I'm smoking some soft blend in one of my personal Medwakh. But as you can see, I'm just using this parting tool to take down a nice profile, nice and easy. With the taper to it, a lot of times you'll go in there and you'll start taking it down level, and because of the taper it'll fool your eye and you'll end up with a little bit of a cone shape. So now I'm using the skew with the long point on top, because this allows what's known as a planing cut, and planing cuts leave a nice smooth surface behind, and you make very shallow cuts with a planing cut, because I want lots of controls so that I don't drive the blade into the bowl block and end up chipping the bowl block or end up gouging out a big old chunk of wood. But one of the things that's beautiful about this planing cut is it leaves a really, really smooth surface behind. My grandpa Stan used to say that that a good lathe man with a sharp skew doesn't need sandpaper. And I'll tell you what, I still need sandpaper. So here we go. Alright, so pardon me, as you can see, we've now profiled this down to just a nice cylinder. There's plenty of wood there to make sure that we don't overdo it in terms of how much wood we've removed, because we got to stay within a certain diameter in order to make sure that the pipe is structurally sound. And I want to be able to take this down to more or less its final shape, and make sure that I can see very clearly what I'm doing. Now the pipe I'm making is of a style we refer to as a dabour, which is the wasp belly. So the center of the stem actually tapers inwards. And to help establish what's going to be happening up on the bowl end, I'm taking a fingernail gouge and I'm cutting a nice shallow smooth curvature that comes from the bottom of that block out onto the pipe stem itself. This ensures that when I actually shape the bowl, I can do a nice smooth transition. It also ensures that down on that end, the dabour shape will blend in smoothly. And now we're going to go back to these planing cuts, and we're just going to start to take nice shallow cuts, and we're just going to begin to establish the dabour profile. Now on the finish end of the cut, where I get up near the bowl, you'll see that I'm leaving a lip of wood, and it's there for two reasons. Number one, it helps me to visualize the dabour shape, and number two, it acts as a stopgap measure so that I don't go shearing past that point and again drive into the bowl block and end up tearing up the bowl block. The nicer shape the bowl block is in, the easier it is for me to carve the final shape of the bowl. It's starting to look like something now. Alright, now I'm going to just create a little bit of a taper, a counter taper, down at the end to where the filter goes on, because not only is it a nice shape, but it ensures that you don't have just a square edge sticking up to get caught on things and end up getting chipped or anything. Now that we have the basic profile done, you can see that we've got that nice tapered shape at the end where the filter goes, and a nice taper in the center. Alright, so I'm now removing my live center from my tailstock, and I'm going to replace it with a drill bit that inserts into the tailstock. Right now that's a 3/8 inch bit that's in there, but that's not the bit we're going to be using. It just happened to be what was in the drill when I put it in there. We're actually going to change over to a bit that's slightly less than 1/4 inch and about 3 inches long, because the shorter a bit is, the less it vibrates when you drill. Now, drilling a long hole in a piece of wood is actually much more challenging than one would believe, especially when it's the wood that's spinning rather than the drill bit. It's very easy for that drill bit to wander and take itself off in a different direction and not end up, where we want it in the end. So we want this shorter drill bit because it will vibrate less, it flexes less, and as a result, we're less likely to have drill bit wander. The vagaries of making a Medwakh, especially doing it completely by hand like this, is that we're going to have problems that just happen because either there's a place in the wood that has a different hardness than what we've already drilled through, and other things that mean that roughly 1 out of every 4 Medwakh that we get started on actually fails somewhere along the process. This is why we haven't inserted any hardware or anything. This is why we're taking this, one step at a time, because anywhere along the way here, this pipe can't fail in its making process. Now I'm spinning at a pretty high speed here, and you'll see I'm taking very, very shallow cuts with my drill. I'm only going in about 1/4 inch each time I advance the drill, and backing it off to release the heat and the scrap that's left over, and then bring that drill back in again, go little ways, back it out again. And I'll continue to do this just a little bit at a time. This ensures, number one, we don't build up too much heat in the wood. Number two, it ensures that our hole that we drill is going to be as straight as humanly possible. If I was drilling with a drill bit smaller than this along this entire length, what I would actually be doing is I would be rotating my drilling chuck about a quarter turn every time I advance a quarter inch to help ensure that it drills straight. But once I get to about 2/3 of the length of this drill bit, now I can just start to slide my tailstock back and forth in order to finish off the drilling. Now, once we have done this and we've got a good starting hole, now what we want to do is we want to switch over to a larger drill bit. We're actually going to go to a 1/4 inch drill bit, and this drill bit is also about 1 inch longer than the one that I'm using. Having drilled just a little below a 1/4 inch, it means our drill will cut cleanly without any wander, and it also means that it'll drill a bit deeper. What I want in the end is I want this 1/4 inch shaft, this 1/4 inch hole, to go 2/3 of the length of the stem of the pipe, because that will ensure that there's a good flow of smoke when this pipe is smoked. It'll really increase the throughput. If this was an 1/8 inch hole along the entire length, then we're dealing with less throughput. And it also means that if we're cleaning and maintaining the pipe, it's more difficult. So what we're going to be doing here is, by doing this 1/4 inch hole, it means that if we use a pipe cleaner to clean this pipe, it's not going to be, it's not going to be having to be shoved through a hole that's 5 inches long that's just slightly bigger than the pipe cleaner. Because that leads to gunk ending up blocking the holes and pipe cleaners bending and all kinds of wacky stuff going on. But once I get to about 2/3 of the distance, a little more, that I'm drilling this, I can now just again begin sliding my tailstock and taking a 1/4 inch at a time until I finish the depth of my drilling. Now, the advantage of using this Morse taper style drill bit is that it's a much more accurate drilling than when you're using an actual, Jacob's chuck, which is what we normally have on a drill press or a regular hand drilling, like what I put on the tailstock at the beginning of this drilling process. But now that we have this drilled out 2/3 of its length at a 1/4 inch, we are going to switch over now to what they call a aircraft bit. Very long 1/8 inch drill bit that's going to allow us to drill the last third of the length of the pipe in 1/8 inch. This is very important because there are certain dynamics in terms of the size and shape of the Medwakh's bowl, as well as the initial vent that causes the Medwakh to smoke the right way. And so by using this 1/8 inch drill bit, we're going to be able to get those dynamics. Now I'm taking the drill bit, I'm getting the point of it right dead center of what's going to be my bowl, and I'm marking it with a marker so that when I drill in, I do not go any farther than the center of my bowl. Because when I take and actually drill the bowl hole itself, we want the very center of the bowl to come down and meet that hole, and then we want it to be open from the center of the bowl back just a short distance. Soft blend here. Smooth. All right. Oh. Overdid it on that one. Oh yeah, buddy. All right, I'm just kidding, you guys. All right, so we're just about set up here. There we go. And it's just a short distance to drill. As you can see, it's just shy of 1 inch. And over that very, very short distance, we don't have to worry about that 1/8 inch drill bit wandering in one direction or another and not being central to our bowl. Okay. At this point, our stem is completely drilled out. And as you can see here, I'm just showing that that distance that we drilled in goes to the center of the bowl. And now we have to actually drill the bowl hole itself. So I'm going to remove the end of this from my 4-jaw self-centering chuck, and I'm then going to take and open it up wider so that I can turn the pipe sideways and place it in. I check it to make sure that I have the grain oriented the right way, because if I have the grain oriented the wrong way, there's a chance that the pipe bowl itself will split, either when I insert the liner or during the course of its use or as time goes by. So it's very important that I have the grain oriented the right way. In fact, as we're looking at it right now, the grain goes up and down, so that if we were to split the grain, it would actually take layers from the top of the bowl down towards the bottom of the pipe. I don't know if you guys follow what I mean by that or not. But I'm now switching over to a 1/2-inch spot drill. The spot drill is important because, number one, it's very short, which again means that it can't vibrate around and jump up and down and stuff. I'm using the point of the spot drill to make sure that I'm coming to the dead center point of my bowl. And once I get the spot drill up there, then what I can do is adjust the blank in the chuck so that it is in the correct position. Another thing that's very important is once I get this centered, I have to reduce the speed of my lathe, because with this stem sticking way out, if I run it at high speed, I'll start to get a lot of jostling, a lot of side-to-side vibration in my lathe itself because of the difference in the weight. So now that we've got it pretty much in place, now it's time for me to adjust the speed of the lathe. Up in the headstock, there are sets of pulleys and a belt, and what I'm doing is I'm just shifting the location of the belt on top and bottom so that we go down to our slowest speed. I check it to make sure that it can rotate freely, doesn't hit the tool rest or anything, and we're ready to go. Now, my initial depth of drilling on this is going to be 1/4 inch, which is the minimum in order for the liner to insert and sit flush. Now, when I drill into that 1/4 inch, you can see that I'm advancing that drill bit ever so slowly. I don't want it to chatter, I don't want it to jump, I don't want it to tear the wood. And there we go, we're at our depth of 1/4 inch, and if everything has gone according to plan, because this is where we solve the mystery as to whether or not we drilled straight, when we back that out of there, we should see our stem hole there at the bottom of the bowl, and we do. Now, the camera I was using for this initial filming I needed because it was a flip style camera where I could turn the screen and see where I was oriented, but I realized very quickly that it couldn't focus in on this macro tightness necessary in order to see what we got going on with the bowl here. So in just a moment I switch over to my other camera, there we go, which as you can see is a far better camera in terms of both color and in terms of being able to zoom in. And so once we get adjusted here, we'll get a look at the center of that bowl. Now here is the custom cast bronze bowl liners that I get done. There's a company that produces bushings, and I have them produce these for me with a bronze that does not contain oil. Most bronze that's used in industrial applications actually has SAE 30 or 40 oil impregnated into it because it's used as bushings and things that need lubrication. These I have made without the oil in them because that way the oil won't, suck out and leach into the bowl and end up affecting the wood. Not to mention it probably wouldn't be good to be smoking oil, huh? So I've taken that insert and I've put it in place, and now I'm using just my regular tailstock as a ram in order to push it in so that I know it's in there as deep as it can go and that the outside collar of the bowl liner is flush. And so there we go. We have switched and we are now looking at it pushed in flush. I crank her down nice and tight, make sure it's in there all the way, and when I back it off, there we go. At this point, this is basically a functional pipe. We still have to add our filter holder that goes on the end of the pipe, but other than that, this is a functional pipe. So at this point, it's time to pop it on out of there and switch it to a different position so that we can insert the filter holder itself. Warm day out here in the shop. I tell people I'm just one guy in a shed, and you can see from this video, I'm just one guy in a shed. But now that we're set to go, it's time for us to insert the filter holder. Alright, so I've inserted the filter holder, which, as you guys know, is a style of flare fitting that we do that. It also has a bronze collar. It's very important that when you're putting your filters on and off your pipe, whether it's a Shanaku pipe or it's a commercial pipe, that rather than twisting your filters on, that you rock them back and forth to put them on and take them off. This will extend the length of your pipe, especially with a commercial pipe, because it's less stress on the insert to wiggle that on there than to shove it on there. I've now moved to a flat disc sander, and I'm removing the excess material from underneath the bowl. We want that excess material gone so that our stem comes along smoothly and stays smooth and even all the way up to the rosp, to the beak of the pipe. I do this by eye, and I adjust it a little at a time, and once I have it down where the majority of that extra wood has been removed, I'll actually then use this process to begin rounding out the sides of the pipe bowl itself. My funny little hat I wear because I cover my head to show respect to God. While that may seem a little strange on my part, I feel it's very important that we acknowledge the Creator if we're a creator. Here we go. Just swing the old camera around so you can see how I've rounded off those bottom edges so that we've got a relatively smooth transition. You can also see that little bit of stuff there that's on the edge of the hole down at the bottom of that. We'll actually take eventually a very long, thin, sharp blade point. We'll trim that so that it's nice and smooth. But now we're going to move over to the flexible shaft machine so that I can take a rapid stock removal bit, a structured carbide bit, and I can begin to remove some of this extra wood that's around the circumference of the bowl. Now, because it's very hard to do this and hold the camera at the same time, what I'll be doing is, initially here I'll just be demonstrating to you how it is that I'm doing this, but then step by step I'll show you the stock removal one portion at a time. Alright, so I've got my structured carbide flying at good speed, and I want to first take off the corners on the bowl block, as well as doing the initial stock removal for the rosp. In this case, I'm starting with the rosp to help define the front edge of the bowl. I brace my thumb against the piece of work, and you see how I'm holding the shaft in my fingers, because this allows me to really control not only the depth but the movement of the flexible shaft as I'm using it. Alright, so having taken and done the initial stock removal on the rosp just to help me define the corners of my bowl platform, I'll remove the corners of the rear of the bowl platform, as you can see. From there I move on to remove the corners at the front of that block and begin to work my way down close to the bowl liner itself. The reason I use the size flare that I do at the top of my bronze bowl liners is because it keeps me from removing too much wood, and that ensures a good, strong, stable bowl. But here the majority of the stock removal has been done, and you can now see the beginning shape of the Medwakh bowl really beginning to form up. Now, you'll note that in the very end of it that there's that hole that's in it from when we had it on the lathe. And just given the way things are, there's a part of me that really believes that the beak shape on the Medwakh partly is because we need to find a way to remove that hole that's in that end of the pipe. And when we do the beak like this, when we do the Ross, it takes in it and it removes that hole completely, so that we've just got the smooth curve of our Ross. Now that we've got the basics of our Ross going, what I do is I switch over to a flat file, and I want to make sure that the bottom of our pipe is relatively flat, so if we set it down on the desktop, it won't roll over and spill our doha. This also helps me even it out, because taking it down on the disc sander, we always end up with a little bit of variation, a little bit of angle to one side or the other. Sorry about the focus here. Now I'm just taking and I'm smoothing in the curves so that they make a nice transition. There's a little bit of a bump there where we had ground down a little bit, so we want to take that bump out, make sure the shaft is relatively straight. Now we want to move to a round rasp, and we're going to use this round rasp to just smooth the transition here in our debour. Our transition at the base of the bowl where it meets the stem. Our transition where our Ross meets the edge of the bowl at the front. And then we're going to switch back over to our flat file, and we're now going to flatten the Ross on both sides. Wiggle a fresh filter on my pipe here while I'm waiting for the next narration. As you can see, my never-ending, always-present cigarette. Now I've switched over to a sanding drum as opposed to my structured carbide, and I'm using this now to begin to smooth the transition, to create a curve at the bottom of the bowl so it has a little more pipe bowl-like appearance. I guess that's probably my main influence in terms of Western pipes, is I like to have that kind of rounded shape at the bottom of it that really says pipe bowl. And again, go in and just use the file to smooth the transitions. Alright, so here we go. This is basically our functional Medwakh. At this point, we could throw a filter on here, we could smoke that puppy, break it in, and be a happy camper. But of course, we want to do better than that. So we're moving back to our sanding drum, and now we're smoothing and rounding the transitions. Time to throw that in the old butt can. There we go. And as we smooth these transitions and round them out, you can see there are some dark marks there on the cherry. Cherry picks up a burn mark very quickly and easily. And I'm using a relatively smooth sanding drum, probably about 120 grit, because I don't at this point want to put big gouges that I'm just going to have to remove later. And again, working on those transitions. And you note again, I'm using my thumb to brace against the piece, and I'm holding the flexible shaft in my index fingers and middle finger and a little bit of the ring finger so that I can help control. But now that we've got that nice profile done, and we're looking pretty good. Now, next we're going to move on to polishing. Now, my battery died, unfortunately, when I was getting set to polish this piece. So this is the following day, earlier in the morning, and I've got my 3-wheel buffer set up, and I'm actually going to be buffing a different pipe. And on my first wheel, I put some Tripoli on it. My middle wheel, I put some white diamond, and the very last wheel is a combination of beeswax and carbon nuba wax. And so going to the Tripoli wheel, this is actually a black walnut pipe that I'm doing here. It's one I'm making that's a little less traditional in shape, but I'm just just working it until it brings up a nice satin finish. The combination of the heat from the buffer as well as the buffing compound itself helps to seal the grain. I now move on to the diamond white, and this brings up just a high shine. Now the transition may be a little deceptive, but there's about 7 to 10 minutes of polishing on that first wheel, and as you can see, there's much less time and polishing needed on the second wheel, simply because it has diamonds in it, as the name implies, diamond white, and therefore it cuts with much more ferocity when it makes its polish, and so it brings up that high shine really fast. And now I use the wheel to put a very thin but very thorough coat of the bee and carnauba wax onto the pipe. Usually once I've finished waxing the pipe, I'll then go back to my middle wheel and I will take and just lightly buff that wax, because it really pulls that shine back up. Alright, so what I've done is I've taken just a little bit of mineral oil now, and I'm putting it on over the top of that wax. And grab myself a shop cloth and just wipe off the excess oil. What this does is, number one, it takes off any wax that's beaded up and sat on top of the surface. And number two, when I go back to that buff, what it's going to do is ensure that it buffs the wax to a shine, as opposed to takes the wax back off of the shaft and other parts of our Medwakh. Soft blend. If you guys haven't had a chance to try soft blend, I highly recommend it. It packs a punch, but it's very mellow when smoking. Bassem over and Art over at Medwakh.com, they have it's got to be 100 different kinds of doha at this point, and I'd say that the soft blend is definitely one of my favorites in terms of just sitting around and smoking my mehua when I don't have any cigarettes made, because I make my own cigarettes. But now you can see when I tip it in the light that there's a high shine. You can see it bouncing up and down the shaft, and unfortunately you can't really see it with this film, but there are some amazing iridescent patches in the grain of this black walnut. Alright guys, so here we go. Now, like I say, I ran out of batteries, so I couldn't show you guys the polishing of this pipe, but I wanted to show you this debour that this video has been about the making of. It's a gorgeous little pipe, lots of character. Right here on the side of the bowl, you see that dark line? That is not a crack. What that is some of this cherry gets some dark lines that run through it, and they look really amazing, and we lucked out that one on the side of the bowl. But there we go guys. I've got to do a little bit of polishing on the bowl liner itself. See, that right there is just a little bit of the polish that was still on the side of the bowl, but there it is guys. And so I'm gonna snap a couple of pictures of this with my good regular camera, and I hope you've enjoyed watching the birth of a Shanaku Medwakh. I shall talk to you soon. We're out. Peace.